Originally, the idea for the movie was a mini black hole sort of enters the Earth's orbit. And Greg came on, and I think he, being a director and thinking visually, felt that a black hole was not that visually, it's like, how do you show a black hole? A black hole is the absence of everything. A black hole is black, it's nothingness. But the aurora borealis does affect ham radio signals. It has to do with radiation getting spit out of the sun. It kicks off these solar flares, they shoot out into space, they head towards Earth, they react with our atmosphere.
We actually did a lot of research into what makes the aurora. So the auroras that we have in the film are, I like to think, scientifically accurate. We know that aurora is created from energy streaming in from the sun, going through magnetic field lines into the Earth, and we tried to stay true to that as much as possible.
The solar corona is the outer atmosphere of the sun. It's many times larger than the sun itself. You can see it during an eclipse or with special equipment here on Earth. The two central mysteries of the corona are, one, why is it so hot? It's about 1,000 times hotter than the surface of the sun, and we've been trying for decades to explain that. And two, how do the outer layers of the corona get accelerated to form the solar wind that streams throughout the solar system?
The solar wind is a high-speed flow of electrically charged gas coming from the surface of the sun at about 1,000,000 miles an hour. The solar wind affects and changes the shape of the Earth's magnetic field and the geospace environment. For almost 30 years now, scientists have measured high-speed winds coming from the sun and believe that it comes from open magnetic field regions called coronal holes. However, it's only been recently, with new observations from the SOHO spacecraft, or Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, have we actually been able to make detailed two-dimensional observations of this source region and of this structure, and find that it's coming from or linked to this honeycomb-shaped pattern or network structure of the magnetic field on the surface of the sun.
When we look at a Yoko image, an image in soft X-rays, or X-rays emitted by about 1,000,000-degree plasma, there are unique structures called sigmoids. These sigmoids are S-shaped structures, so they're pretty easy to spot. These structures are much more likely to erupt than regions that don't have an S shape. Many active regions just have a very simple shape, just connecting one region on the sun's surface to another, no twist in them at all. On the other hand, these sigmoid structures are very twisted. The twist that's in them is a clue that they've got some excess energy stored in them. It's kind of like a spring. You can imagine that if you took a springy piece of metal and you twisted it up, you'd have to work to get it all twisted. And when you let it go, it would spring open.
When this billion-ton cloud of plasma slams into the Earth, some of the charged particles flow into the polar regions along invisible lines of magnetic force. The Earth's field is shaped very much like a bar magnet. And when these particles impact the atmosphere, we call them the northern and southern lights.
This plasma then spirals into funnel-like areas of the magnetosphere called polar cusps. And as the rest of the magnetosphere stretches and snaps, it accelerates plasma already trapped by the Earth. As these charged particles rain into the ionosphere and upper atmosphere above the poles, they release tremendous amounts of energy as they react with the gases in the Earth's atmosphere. This chemical reaction creates a spectacular light show known as the Northern Lights, or the aurora borealis.
The aurora borealis, so anyone who's seen it, is one of the stunning events of your lifetime. They're brighter these days. Is something going on there? Do they tie in with your field? Where do they come from?
It's a stunning sight. It's really beautiful to look at. I don't think we've seen one quite this bright for maybe 30 years. But from the point of view of...
There's an 11-year solar cycle, and we're moving now from the period where we had a minimum of the solar cycle up toward a maximum. And as we move up toward this maximum, we expect to see more CMEs coming off the sun, and we expect to have more of these S-shaped structures that will be on the sun.
As the sun becomes more active, these explosions become much more common. Most of the time, the Earth is not in the way of these clouds as they come out from the sun. But sometimes the Earth does get in the way.
Drastic changes in the shape of the Earth's magnetic field can damage satellites or disrupt communication.
In addition to all the systems on Earth, like pagers and wireless telephones and TV satellites that are affected by space weather, astronauts and people in high-altitude aircraft are also affected by the particle radiation from solar storms. If we have a week's extra warning, that can certainly help us with planning such trips by astronauts or extravehicular activities much better than we can now and much more safely.
There is some kind of relationship to solar storms, the aurora borealis, and ham radio.
CQ-22, QYV by call. Because of the solar activity. Yeah, it's beautiful. We've got the sky over my house lit up like a bonfire. Where is the sun supposed to be shooting off flares that stretch out half 100 kilometers? Oh, instead of it will be. Tell me about it. I'm picking up signals from places like a never.
It's visually very stunning. It happens in 11-year cycles. It messes with ham radios, and so we kind of embraced it.
W2QYV here. Who have I got?
Name's John. We're on different frequencies. We're a generational gap. And what this does, this ham radio that these two fellas use, is it brings them together.
Amateur radio is one of these pursuits. It's not just a hobby, it's a radio service. I mean, we're licensed by the Federal Communications Commission.
Listen, you can't broadcast without a license. Unless this is an emergency, you're going to have to get off the band.
I have occasionally run across unlicensed radio operators. I'm not necessarily going to brush them off because they may have a sincere desire to learn more about ham radio, and they could be a future licensed ham radio operator once they gain more knowledge about what we're doing.
Yes, she is.
So this is what people used before the net, huh?
Well, not exactly, I'll tell you. Hams were, bingo. These babies were different. Not everybody had one of these.
Ham radio operators were doing worldwide communications long before the internet existed.
This is what we used when I was your age.
When I was a kid, my younger brother Noah, who's in the movie, got a CB radio, and we used to love talking on them. You know, 10-4, and you had handles, you know, big red and little red. So that was where the idea came from. I sort of loved my CB radio as a kid. There was a sort of fad in the 70s when everybody had them in cars, and it was the cool thing to have. I couldn't imagine a fireman coming home and being excited about a CB radio, so I kind of juiced it up to a ham radio.
Amateur radios work simply by the boxes that are used today. The original amateur radio was a receiver. It was ability to pick up a small radio signal from the air.
Can you hear me?
And a transmitter, which was a device that put radio waves into the air.
A radio is taking audio signals from my voice, and it's converting it into electrical impulses.
CQ-15. Yeah, 2QYV, calling unidentified station, Queens.
Then it turns it into a radio frequency waveform, which eventually gets turned back into electrical signals and back into audio again.
Radio does strange things. Radio waves are affected by the Earth's magnetic field, by the sun, and by the atmosphere.
Every 11 years, the solar radiation builds up and then decreases again. I can recall times when there's been solar disturbances that will affect the ionosphere around the Earth. And when the ionosphere is affected, it does alter the way the high-frequency bands operate.
This ain't no dream.
But how could it be? I don't know. But we gotta be talking off the mother sunspot of all time.
Lower frequencies are affected entirely different than high frequencies are affected. Radio amateur frequencies are very much affected by this particular phenomenon coming from the sun. We kind of look forward to it. In a lifetime, of course, of every 11 years, an amateur has very few times to really experience the sunspot cycle. When it happens, it allows us to talk very, very far away places on very high frequencies that otherwise we'd not be able to do.
Hello? Hello?
John? John Sullivan?
It's me.
A little bit of that came from the opening of reading Contact, Carl Sagan's novel, where radio signals that we send out, television signals, travel on in space perhaps infinitely. So whatever we broadcast 40 years ago is just now showing up at whatever is 40 light years from us.
So how old are you?
I'm 36.
36. You're all grown up. You gotta be married and everything.
There was a case of an amateur who likes to listen to short waves, in this particular case to FM stations far away. While sitting listening to this station, he overheard a station in Florida. And one of the things that we do when we hear faraway stations is to write down the details of it, the time, the date, so forth. The amateur sent a card to the station in Florida, and a number of weeks later got a reply back. Yes, indeed, we investigated the time and so forth. The program that was heard was broadcast in that time frame from the station. However, the station's been off the air for 10 years.
Space shuttle discovery. When I made my space shuttle contact back in 1992, I knew approximately when it was going to be flying over my house. I was calling my call sign out time after time, N6TFS, N6TFS. I paused, and suddenly the voice came back over the speaker, N6TFS. Well, then I knew that this handshaking had occurred. Then I mail a QSL card. Then they mail me a card that confirms that my contact to the space shuttle was verified.
What'd you say your call station or your call letters were?
W2QYV.
Radio amateurs
trailers.
all over the
Visita
world
mi
collect
canal.
what is called QSL cards. These are cards that we send verifying the fact that we have contacted each other in various places of the world. Without the atmospheric storms on the sun, many of these contacts would indeed not be made.
A lot of hams work at aerospace industry, and they have the ability and the knowledge to design and build these satellites. Some of them are only 12 inches in a cube size.
Ignition and liftoff. Good.
Guidance is controlling very well. Passing through Mach 1 at max Q.
The satellites have gotten that trip into orbit because in some cases they need ballast on board the rocket to balance out the payload. And so these small satellites, crammed full of high-tech equipment, they're essentially getting a free trip into space. And hopefully they'll have a number of years of a serviceable life.
Radio really got its start in 1886 when Heinrich Hertz was curious about the fact that electrical energy seemed to go off into space. He would observe small amounts of corona, that is a small lightning discharge from high voltage generators. So this is what you see here.
I can't believe people are still using these things. You must be a real old-timer, huh?
Days like this, I feel like I'm getting there, you know?
In the early days of radio, all the radio was able to do is detect the signals. They weren't able to pull in weak signals. They had no amplification. Radio tubes were introduced just prior to World War I. Radio tubes allowed weak signals to be amplified and to be heard over a much, much further distance. That's all there was to radio in the early days, was a buzzing sound in the headsets. If a ship were going to sink, they would send out either CQD or SOS, which came along a little bit later. Amateurs have done things for people for many, many years. We have always gotten involved in providing an emergency communication backup for earthquakes, fires, and so forth.
Hello.
Hey, is that you? Hey, I've been trying to cue you all night. Where you been?
Hey, how the hell did you do it?
Do what?
Do what? Series. You called Buford's Homer. How the hell did you do it?
Wasn't too tough, buddy. The game happened 30 years ago.
The idea of time is something that people have been struggling to understand in physics for a long time, and we certainly have many issues that we don't fully grasp yet.
It's like I don't know what to believe.
What do you mean?
Because I still remember what it was like when you died in the fire. But I'm the only one.
I don't understand what you're talking about.
I remember both at the same time. It's like waking up from a dream and you're not sure what's real.
I really like the idea of talking across time to one another. I think all of us in our lives have thought, well, what if I had, done this instead of that?
Well, there are two pillars of 20th century physics. One is relativity, and the other was quantum mechanics.
Quantum mechanics, our best understanding about how things work in the microscopic realm, seems to indicate that although we usually think about the universe as one gigantic river of information and time flowing inexorably forward from one moment to the next, it turns out that quantum theory paints a universe which may allow for parallel universes splitting off from one another and branching out to infinity, much like tributaries that can branch off of that main river flow and allow time to have all sorts of strange and bizarre properties relative to what we ordinarily experience in the main flow itself.
I love time travel movies, I love time travel fiction, and I love this notion of what if you could have a time travel story where nobody traveled through time, but only information traveled back and forth through time.
Hey, what about Apollo? How did it all work out?
What if radio signals went into a black hole? Now, of course, they would never come out of a black hole, because once they enter what's called the singularity, where time and space and everything just sort of boils down to one dimension, is sort of my understanding of it, nothing ever escapes that. But what if it did? What if radio signals bounced in and out of this black hole, so signals from the future would come to the past, and signals from the past would bounce into the future?
The notion of a wormhole arises in general relativity as a kind of connection or tube in the geometry of space-time connecting two different regions. Professor Kip Thorne wrote some papers where he stated very clearly what would be required in order to have closed-time-like curves in general relativity.
It turns out that string theory requires our universe to have more than 3 spatial dimensions. Our universe, according to this theory, has at least 6 and probably 7 more space dimensions that as yet no one's directly seen, but the theory says that undeniably the dimensions are there.
Tus trailers, visita mi canal.
John is presented with the possibility of saving his father's life back in time, and he takes it because he can't resist, but what he fails to consider is the ripple effect. What else happens when you change a piece of history? And he finds out soon enough that it's a dangerous thing to tinker with.
The standard paradox is imagine going back in time and killing your grandfather right before you were conceived. Before your father was conceived, right? That's a logical paradox, isn't it?
In reality, according to quantum theory, our universe is but one of an infinite number of branching tributaries of time, where things evolve and flow perhaps at different rates and in different manners, and who knows, perhaps even at some point these tributaries might actually cross, allowing these parallel universes to come into contact.
I don't consider this movie science fiction. I would say it's maybe science fantasy. Hardcore science fiction people are definitely going to turn their nose up at the science fiction in this movie, because what's interesting about the movie is not the what if of the science fiction, it's the emotional what if. It's what if and then how do characters and how do people respond and react to it. You're dealing in such a world of fantasy that the rules have to be consistent enough for people to believe the story and not get lost, but flexible enough to accommodate the drama. I have rules, and rules are important. The audience has to believe in the rules, but I did bend them. One of the rules is that the worlds are parallel. So if it's October 11th, 3 p.m. in 69, it's October 11th, 3 p.m. in 99, and we're kind of moving in sync. So when Frank survives the fire, John now remembers him being alive.
John Sullivan?
Yeah, it's me.
You're the voice of an angel. You reach right out of heaven and you pull my butt out of the frying pan.
Tell me I'm not dreaming here. Tell me it's really you.
It's me, John. This ain't no dream. Essentially, at the bottom line, this movie is about playing God with your own destiny, because you get to go back and you change things and you find out how it would have been.
I suspect that if we understood it better, we could give more profound answers as to what time really is. But I think that's still to come.
Firefighting is extremely simple. We teach it to school children all the time. We call it the triangle of fire. The fire needs three things to burn: fuel, heat, and oxygen. But if you eliminate any one of those triangles, heat, oxygen, or fuel, you won't have a fire. So for us, the way we fight fire to eliminate that triangle is take away the heat, and we do that by the use of water. Firefighting is one of the most dangerous professions in the United States.
Every situation is different, and every situation that I've been to over the last 13.5 years helps me with anything I'm doing, from fighting a fire down below on a ship of a boat to fighting a fire on the 5th floor of a hotel. And there's all these things that go through your mind as you're going in, because number one, you want to come out because you want to go home to your family or your loved ones the next day.
The great backbone of the fire service are the wives of firefighters. I know for me that when I kiss my wife goodbye in the morning, I realize the thought is in my mind that this might be the last time I ever see her. I don't think the wives really, truly allow themselves to think about, you know, are we the last time we're going to be together? Some might, but others try to symbolize their love for their husbands by wearing pendants of their badges, or sometimes a Maltese cross around their neck that would have their husband's name on it, or badge number. Certainly we wear these badges, we work hard for the particular ranks that we have, and a wife of a firefighter plays an important role. So a lot of times firefighters will bestow upon their wives a gift of their badge or a symbol of their firefighting family. In 1969, a lot has changed in modern days as we've entered the new millennium. One of those being communication. Each firefighter for us in Los Angeles has their own personal radio. We have a personal alarm device that we wear in case we get lost inside of a structure. But when push comes to shove and it's a worst case scenario, we have alarms and warnings that we can show other firefighters that we're in trouble.
There's been many cases where a fireman's been on a second or third or even higher floor where he's been trapped or in trouble. So in those instances, the fireman will throw his helmet out the door to get the attention of the firefighters or somebody to come and make the rescue.
There's always an engineer right at this panel. So if you can land your helmet close to him, he knows to take his attention from pressures and pumping and watching the lines into somebody's in trouble above him. And that's a universal sign for us in the fire service that someone's in dire trouble. When I was assigned here, Fire Station 37, we had a pretty disastrous fire in a fraternity house. My partner and I went up a ladder and in through a window, and my instincts told me, don't go any further. You know, the firefighting instinct says, you know, you've got to penetrate, you've got to move, you've got to, you know, get to the deep seat of the fire, where the fire is truly burning. And I held all my crew back, and we waited, and when the smoke cleared, what developed before me was why my instincts came true, is that the whole floor had fallen into the basement. And if we had taken another 5 steps, we would have been swallowed into the basement and, you know, potentially been injured or possibly killed.
As firefighters, we depend a lot on our instincts, and they do just come second nature. A lot of times we'll do things and we think about it later. We have no idea why we did them, what we saw, what we heard.
All firefighters have a certain ability to follow their instincts. It's something that they need to learn to rely on, and I think they get that from experience. They get it from learning from other firefighters who have more experience than they do, by listening and by drilling.
393, respond to Manhattan Box 132, off-ramp of George Washington Bridge.
All the firemen are assigned a specific area, whether it be inside man, top man, tiller man, nozzle, or hydrant. Tillerman's position on the truck when you go to a structure fire is one utility. Somebody has to be in charge of disconnecting power lines. If there's a water problem, shutting off the water to the building. There have been cases where firemen have been electrocuted from power sources that not being shut off.
Frank, a second in. We got the rescue.
Inside position is also on the truck. and their job is to go inside of the building, search and rescue, also forcible entry.
I'm primarily responsible for raising the big ladder. It's a 100-foot aerial ladder. Setting the ground jacks and getting it to a spot on the roof that I feel is safe so that my company can get to the roof and we can perform ventilation operations. I've had ladders stick on the roof once we're done with what we're doing. But I've also had them where you want to use them and they won't come out because something has gone wrong.
What the hell is going on? Kiddo, what's the matter? Gearbox! It's trapped! Break the ladders down! The ladder's down, but you gotta find another way out!
All these questions go through your mind as you're entering a structure. How's the smoke reacting? Is it going to flash over us? You know, how's it maintaining? How's the heat? Is it getting too hot? What's the condition look like upon arrival? Is the building puffing when you come in? What's going on above me? Is there fire burning above my head? Is it burning back past me? Is this a safe route of travel? How am I going to get out of this thing if something does go bad? Could there be people trapped in the room?
Get out for Christ's sake! I got you.
These guys are pretty good about drawing that line between what's right and what's wrong. The only time when we will step over the line is to save somebody else, whether it be a civilian or a fellow firefighter.
On frequency, you wanted to really capture the essence of natural phenomena. It's always the most difficult thing to do in computer graphics. Natural phenomena are filled with all these little subtle looks and movements and textures that your eye is very good at knowing when it's wrong, but it's very difficult to nail down and describe exactly what you're looking for. Every time you see the Aurora Borealis in the movie, it's a visual effect. As far as I know, the number of sightings of Aurora Borealis in Queens is nil, if any, so it was required that we had to go with a visual effect for that. Whenever we start on a project like this, we do a lot of research. We go and look through reams of material to find little things that would be great to include in our Aurora Borealis for the movie. We went and found a lot of video reference of actual Aurora Borealis that was taken from University of Alaska. There was a story, someone walked into the room, saw the aurora, and asked him where he'd gotten the photography for the Aurora Borealis, because he said he used to live in Alaska and it was a perfect ringer for what he'd seen. So that was probably the best compliment that we could receive for something like that. We started just sitting down and talking with Greg Hoblet, and in that time frame we sit down and do a lot of storyboarding, we make some concept art. So you kind of have to do a lot of exploring at that time and just constantly going back and forth and talking and feeling out what feels right for the kind of movie that we're going for. There's some great work done by Jim Barrett, which had this sort of energy from the sun flying out and spilling across this almost glass-like surface that separated the real Earth from a ghost-like image that was supposed to represent the other time zone. In order to put any effect in a shot, you have to take your virtual camera in the computer and match it up to what was actually done. So we have match movers who sit and we took measurements of certain key features in the scene so that they could go back and create the same thing. After that, the next thing is to start placing the aurora in the sky with what we call the choreography stage. And all that really entails is placing the aurora, putting some basic motion and getting the timing and the feel down. As soon as we're done with that, we'd show it to Greg and have him agree that that's where he wants it to be. From there we start layering the textures on, and we have, you know, several layers that make up the aurora. There's just straight textures that are placed on these moving ribbons in space, and then there's particle systems that kind of add little extra wisps of aurora energy. We sat down at the time we were filming the plate and discussed, you know, where you might want to see the aurora. A great example was the finale for the entire aurora effect at the very end, where it kind of disappears and turns into a baseball. We were standing right there in the street and said, you know, looking up in the sky and said, wouldn't it be great if you kind of tilted the camera up and followed this little wisp of an aurora and ended right about there. So we just grabbed the camera and made a move like that, and were able to put it into the shot.
You all right? You all right?
We have different types of people on the show. We had people who were lighters who, for the hand shot morphing away, will paint all the little textures and make it look like a real hand. There are animators who will go and actually animate the hand disappearing. And finally, if there's the compositors who take all the elements and assemble it with the background plate to make the finished shot. I really liked the range of effects. You had the natural aurora borealis in the sun and those things. The most challenging shots were the sun opening shot and the aurora borealis, especially the fly-through that we go up and see the Earth from space. You know, no one's ever put a camera by the sun to know what it looks like when we're going to actually portray it. So there's a lot of liberty there with where you can go. But nonetheless, you know, we all kind of have some sort of innate understanding of what the sun's supposed to look like. So we had to look and find the reference to know what the public is used to seeing and what would really read well as the sun to incorporate in our effects. I think we all were very happy with the results and achieved what we were trying to get. The original plan was a little simpler than what we finally ended up achieving, so there's a lot of extra work that was great to see come together at the end. And it was also satisfying just working on such a great movie.